All right, this topic was much requested. Today, we are talking about all of the national parks that never existed. We're talking about proposed units of the national park system that, for one reason or another, just never came to fruition. A lot of you commented about this, and it seems like there's a lot of interest in it, so I want to bring you this video. However, we have to constrain this topic a bit. When we talk about proposed national parks, we're talking about literally over 100 locations, and I simply can't fit all of those into a single video. And also, the criteria for what constitutes a proposed park is wildly inconsistent. Like, some have simply been local groups of citizens expressing support for a certain park effort. Others have been studied and proposed by the Park Service itself, and some have even gotten legislation introduced in Congress. The point is, though, there's no consistent criteria, and if we were to lump all of those parks into a proposed category, again, this video would be hours long and probably quite boring. So, to whittle this down and constrain the definition of a proposed national park a little bit, we're only going to talk about parks that had legislation passed by Congress, meaning they were authorized as units of the national park system, but for whatever reason, they just never became fully established. There are 11 of these, plus 5 bonus parks I'm going to talk about at the end of the video. Now, if you do want to learn about all of those other proposed national parks, you're in luck, because I've compiled a full list of them, or at least all of the ones I could find, in my new free newsletter. Yeah, I know, another newsletter, but here's my thinking. I just want a way to stay in touch and communicate with all of you without the constraints of algorithmic recommendation, like whether or not you even see this video or an update I post on Instagram or even put something here on my community tab here on YouTube. All of those things are chosen by an algorithm, and this newsletter will be a way for me to bypass all of that, kind of do a new creative thing, and just get stuff that I make straight to your eyeballs. So, of course, you'll be notified whenever I have a new video out, but I'll also update you on any new projects I may be working on, any appearances or interviews I've done, any parks I've traveled to, which lately has been quite a lot, and I'm planning to include a section on whatever park-related media I'm reading or watching or listening to, and I might even include some national park-related current events or news in there. Basically, this is just a new creative endeavor for me to be able to communicate with you directly. Now, here's the thing. I'm hosting this newsletter over on my Patreon, but as part of the free tier. It's a free newsletter. So you will have to sign up for my Patreon to receive it, but again, it will be free. This part is really not so different than if you just signed up with your email address for like any other newsletter. I'm just hosting it on Patreon because it's easier and I already have a presence over there. In fact, once you sign up, you don't ever even have to go over to Patreon anyway, because the newsletter will be delivered right to your email inbox, just like other newsletters. So if that sounds interesting to you, or you just want to see the full list of proposed national parks, head on over to patreon.com/nationalparkdiaries to sign up. All right, I've rambled long enough in this intro, and half of you are probably already gone, so let's just go ahead and get started. First up, we've got the Belvoir Mansion and Lord Fairfax Estate, located on the U.S. military base of Fort Belvoir in Northern Virginia. This site preserves the Belvoir Mansion, or what's left of it. Belvoir was the estate of Lord Thomas Fairfax, the 6th Lord Fairfax of Cameron, which is in no way relevant to this story, but that is my name, and so I felt compelled to include it. The mansion was gutted by fire in 1783 and then destroyed completely by the British during the War of 1812, and only the foundations still stand today. This property was originally proposed to be transferred from the War Department to the National Park Service in 1935, but that just never happened. The ruins are still visible today, and they're listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but because the site is on an active military base, the public isn't able to visit them. Next, there was supposed to be a site that commemorated the Battle of Columbus, Georgia, one of the last battles of the American Civil War. It was fought a full week after Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. Again, though, just nothing ever really happened with this site. No further federal involvement ever occurred. Today, there is a simple commemorative plaque and granite marker placed at the corner of 4th Avenue and 14th Street in Columbus, Georgia, which, of course, you can visit. The Battle of Eutaw Springs was also due for a commemorative NPS site in the small town of Eutaw Springs, South Carolina. This site would have protected the location of the last Revolutionary War battle of the South Carolina campaign, but it was drowned under the waters of Lake Marion before any federal development could occur. Today, remnants of the site are protected by the state of South Carolina and are publicly accessible. Next up, we have St. Mark's National Historic Site, which would have been located in St. Mark's, Florida. This site would have protected the location of a fort that sat at the confluence of the St. Mark's and Waukulla rivers, anyway, south of Tallahassee in Florida's Big Bend region. The fort actually changed hands 4 different times. It was constructed originally by the Spanish in 1660 and was originally named San Marcos de Apalache. It was then taken by the British in 1763 and renamed Fort St. Mark's. It was returned to the Spanish in 1783 and finally captured by Andrew Jackson in 1818 before being ceded to the US in 1821. The Secretary of the Interior was authorized to accept the site as a unit of the National Park System once a land donation could be secured, but that donation never occurred, and today the fort is protected instead as a Florida Historic State Park. From Florida, we move to Blowing Rock, North Carolina, home to what would have been Grandfather Mountain National Monument. This iconic southern Appalachian peak was once privately owned, but again, the Secretary of the Interior was authorized to accept the mountain as a unit of the National Park System if the land was donated. That donation never occurred because the owner of the mountain, Hugh McRae, wanted the mountain to become a national park, but Congress only ever agreed for it to be a national monument, and so McRae refused to donate the land. When McRae died in 2006, a somewhat weird management situation developed. The part of the mountain where all of the development had already occurred, like where you could drive to the top and where all the amenities are, remained in private hands under the control of Grandfather Mountain Stewardship Foundation, which does maintain public access to the site, but for a fee. The undeveloped portion of the mountain was sold to the state of North Carolina as a state park and is freely accessible. So yeah, weird and unique administrative arrangement there. From the mountains of Appalachia, we head to the deserts of California, to Palm Springs, would be home of Palm Canyon's National Monument. This 15-mile stretch of Palm Desert Canyon was authorized to be a national monument in 1922, but there was a stipulation. Because the canyon was located on the reservation of the Agua Caliente Band of Mission Indians, the monument could only be established with the quote-unquote consent and relinquishment of the tribe, which has never been granted. The tribe maintains day-use access to the canyon today for a small fee. Next up is the Patrick Henry National Monument, which would have been located in Brookneal, Virginia, and would have protected the final home and resting place of Patrick and Dorothea Henry, Red Hill. The site was authorized for acquisition in 1935 and 1940, but that authorization was withdrawn in 1944. The main argument in opposition to this site's inclusion in the national park system was that it didn't protect a location that was historically significant to Patrick Henry's life. Today, the site is owned by a private foundation and publicly accessible for a fee. It is also an affiliated unit of the National Park System, operated under the designation Red Hill Patrick Henry National Memorial. Then we have the Pioneer National Monument, which would have been a collection of 4 separate sites in east central Kentucky, centered around pioneer life west of the Allegheny Mountains. The 4 sites were Boonesboro, Daniel Boone's fort on the Kentucky River, Boone's Station, where Boone's children were buried, Bryan Station, another fort, and Blue Lick, a Revolutionary War battlefield. Congress said that when the land for these sites was donated, it would become Pioneer National Monument, but those donations never came, common theme here, and so neither did the National Monument. All sites are still publicly accessible today. Tampa, Florida was supposed to have a Spanish War Memorial Park. There were many proposals and even authorizations for this park, including a proposal on the Davis Islands that would have constructed an elaborate memorial surrounded by 66 acres of parkland, but none of these ever came to fruition. Today, these lands are either luxury homes, just vacant lots, or part of an airport. Fort Benton, located in Fort Benton, Montana, was authorized for acquisition as a unit of the National Park System in 1976, but that acquisition was never acted upon and it was actually rescinded in 1985. The site would have protected the former fur trading outpost and northernmost steamboat landing on the Missouri River. The fort is still accessible today for a small fee. And finally, there is the Georgia O'Keefe National Historic Site, authorized in 1980, and which would have protected the former studio of the famous artist in Abuquio, New Mexico. However, an agreement couldn't be reached on how best to implement a national park unit at the site, so the authorization was rescinded in 1984. Now, that is everything for the proposed sites of the national park system. However, currently, there are still 5 sites that have active authorizations but have still not been established as of today. Obviously, these could be different depending on when you're watching this, but as of the time I am recording this, October 2024, these 5 sites are the Adams Memorial, the Desert Storm/Desert Shield Memorial, and the Global War on Terror Memorial in Washington, D.C., the Coltsville National Historic Site in Hartford, Connecticut, protecting and interpreting the life and factory of firearm manufacturer Samuel Colt, and the Ronald Reagan National Historic Site in Dixon, Illinois, which I talked about in my president's video, which nobody watched. So if you want to learn about the Reagan site, you can go watch that video about all the presidential homes that are protected in the National Park System, linked down below. If you don't, I have nothing else for you for this video. Thanks for joining me here on this journey through the proposed units of the National Park System, or at least the proposed units that meet the very specific criteria we have established for this video. Let me know if you've been to any of these or if you knew of their former NPS involvement. Sign up for my free newsletter, again, over at patreon.com/nationalparkdiaries if you want the full list of proposed national parks, or again, at least the most full one I could come up with, and follow me on Instagram for pretty park pictures. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.